Hi, good to see you again. Welcome to Block 1, Constructing, Measuring, and Using Geometric Notation. Lesson 4. I'll share my screen. So, in your previous lesson, you learned how to understand and use angles as a measure of turn. In today's lesson, you're going to learn how to classify angles using those special names that you may know of, such as acute, obtuse, reflex. Okay, so we're going to be using those names. Remember to like the video, share the video with those you think can benefit, subscribe to the channel, and click on the notification bell so that when new videos are released, you'll be notified. Before we start, I would like you to pause the video and answer these retrieval practice questions in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered these retrieval practice questions, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. So for the first one, you ask, what are angles? What are angles a measure of? Angles are simply a measure of turn. Next, you ask, fill in the missing information. So a quarter turn clockwise is the same as 3/4 turn anti-clockwise. Perpendicular line segments are at what angle to each other? They are 90 degrees or right angles. And next, how many degrees are equal to a 3/4 turn? 270 degrees. Okay, let's do a new learning for this lesson. If I ask you how many different types of angles do you know, what do you think? Well, I'm sure you've thought about it and you may have mentioned some of these. Okay, so I'm going to show some angles, the names, and the degrees. What, angles, what boundaries those degrees should be within. So acute angles should be, you have acute angles, you have right angle, you have obtuse, and you have reflex. So acute angle should be greater than 0 degrees but less than 90 degrees. And then right angles are just 90 degrees. Obtuse angle should be greater than 90 degrees but less than 180 degrees. And then reflex angle should be greater than 180 degrees but less than 360 degrees. You must take note of this information because it's very useful when we start to classify angles. Okay, if I ask you to classify this angle shown in the diagram, what would you say? Well, of course, we would say it's an acute angle. It is less than 90 degrees. It's obvious. But someone might say, I thought it was reflex. Of course, you may have seen or observed that there could be reflex angle there, but that is not the angle of interest because it is not the angle marked for us to classify. Okay, how can you classify an angle without measuring it? So remember, there is a tool, there is an equipment called protractor. That is what we use to measure angles. We're going to talk about it in our subsequent lessons, but we're not going to be using it. How do we classify this angle without measuring it, seeing that we may not be sure whether it's exactly 90 degrees or less than 90 degrees? Well, we use what we call a set square. So set squares or a set square is set at 90 degrees or a right angle. So when we position it there where one edge of the set square is exactly matching the straight side of the line, we would see that this angle is clearly less than 90 degrees. So we say it's an acute angle. What about if we have this one where we're not sure whether it is obtuse? Because remember, obtuse angle should be greater than 90 degrees but less than 180 degrees. Well, one way to check it is by continuing one of the line to make it straight. Take a ruler and continue one of the line. You would see that it will clearly show that the angle is not up to 180 degrees. So we can say it is obtuse. It's now time for you to pause the video and answer questions 1 and 2 to practice what you've learned. You can do this in 2 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered the questions, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. So if you sort these, you would see that these are the angles. Okay? All right. And then you're asked to circle all the acute angles. And these are the acute angles. You can see they're less than 90 degrees. Pause the video and answer question 3 in 1 minute. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered question 3, here are the answers. So these are the obtuse angles. You can see that they are greater than 90 degrees, but they are less than 180 degrees. Pause the video and answer question 4 in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered the questions, here are the answers. So here we're asked to write the words acute, obtuse, or reflex to label each angle. All right, and you can see them here. So by doing this, you are practicing knowing how to classify angles using the right words. So look at the angle that is marked here. Can you see? That has to be reflex. Why? You can see that it is greater than 180 degrees, but less than 360 degrees. How do we know? If we were to continue a straight line, so I want to comment on this. If we were to continue this straight line, we'd see that, well, that's 180 degrees, but the angle goes way past that. So that has to be reflex. And that's acute, 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 reflex. You can see that. And then obtuse. Okay. All right. Let's do some further learning for the second part of our lesson. If you ask, if somebody says, I can see 2 right angles, that person says, I can see 2 acute angles and 2 obtuse angles, I can see 4 reflex angles. Another person, says, well, I can see some reflex angles. So what would you say? What's your thought? Well, let's investigate. Well, remember, we can use set square to check whether the angle is actually 90 degrees. And you can see that that angle is only slightly, angle F. All right, let's start using the correct convention from our previous lesson. Angle GFE. Angle GFE. Remember, the middle letter tells us the position of the angle is slightly more than 90 degrees. So it's not a right angle. It's not a right angle. So that statement is not right. We cannot see 2 right angles. So we can begin to label things. We can say, well, that's obtuse. That should be obtuse. All right. It's clearly more than 90 degrees, but less than 180. And that's acute. And that's acute. So we can begin to see the statements that are right. Of course, the statement that the person can see 4 reflex angles is right because the person may be looking at the external part of the angles. So the external part of the angles would be the reflex angles. Okay. Let's examine or investigate this statement. Here is another example. What do you think? Is the statement below true or false? Saying that interior angles in regular polygons are never reflex. What do you think? Now, perhaps what you would do is to start to draw more polygons to check the statement. Now, if you keep doing that, you would see that it's actually true. I mean, think about it. If you want to draw regular polygons and then you think that you're going to have to make the interior angles reflex. I mean, have you really thought about what the polygon would look like? The polygons would look very strange. So imagine trying to draw polygons where the angles are reflex, and then you're trying to draw another polygon. It's practically impossible. It's practically impossible. So the statement is true. It's now time for you to pause the video and answer questions 5 and 6 to practice what you've learned. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 5 and 6, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. So for question 5, you ask, here is a trapezium. Label the acute angles A, label the obtuse angles O, and draw an arc to show a reflex angle. And these are the answers. Yeah. So let's remind ourselves again, acute angles must be less than 90 degrees. And these are the acute angles here and here. Obtuse angles must be greater than 90 degrees but less than 180 degrees. And you can see them here. So imagine trying to mark a 90-degree point or using a set square to do it. You would see that that is an obtuse angle because it's greater than 90 degrees. Okay. So you would see. And then this one is clearly greater than 90 degrees. You can see. And then the reflex angle should be the external angle. Next, for question 6, you will ask, this is a right trapezium. Right trapezium meaning it has right angles. In there, you are asked to mark the right angles, and there they are. You could use a set square to check it. Pause the video and answer question 7 in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered question 7, here are the answers. Let's discuss them. So question 7, you were simply asked to complete the table for the interior angles of each shape, right? So complete the tables for the interior angles of each shape. So for shape A, you are asked to name the shape. So it's a quadrilateral, and you are asked to write the number of acute angles. All right. There are no acute angles because they're clearly 90. Write the number of obtuse angles. They're none. Write number of right angles and number of reflex angles. Okay. All right. And so remember, you're talking only about the interior angles, and these are the answers. Okay. It's about exploring these different shapes and writing the number of acute angles, obtuse angles, right angles, and reflex angles. And that brings us to the end of this short lesson. So far, you have learned how to classify angles using these special words like acute, obtuse, right angles, and reflex angles. Well done for sticking around and for building a very good foundation for your learning of maths. Until next time, take really good care of yourself, and bye-bye.